Good evening, Old Testament class. Here we are, we're working our way through Genesis. We've made it to chapter 10. If you've got your Bible and want to read along with me, we're actually going to do two chapters, but don't freak out. We're just going to touch base on 10 here because we get running into a bunch of genealogies. If you'd like to read more about them, get you a good commentary, and you can get into some great detail here. But what chapter 10 is really about, you'll find three genealogies in it. And I bet you can guess who they belong to. Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the three sons of Noah. And what chapter 10 is sort of an explanation of how the earth became populated with people all over the place. So they'll go through all three of those genealogies, and it's about where their descendants, what parts of the earth they eventually settled. For instance, I can't connect all the dots back from between here and there, but from the Bible, we do know that if you're of European descent, then you came through Japheth back to Noah. Or if you're of Jewish descent, then you came through Shem back to Noah. If you're of African descent, then you came through Ham back to Noah. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the three main groups. And what chapter 10 is going to do, it's going to just touch on the Ham and Japheth, and then it's going to go over to Shem. And it's going to get into great detail following Shem, because the line of Shem leads all the way to the cross in the New Testament, because Jesus came through Shem. And really that's what it's going to do. It's just going to show us those other two lines briefly, and then it's going to start dealing with the descendants of Shem, which Abraham is one of them. And we've spent now 10 chapters after this one in Genesis. And so what have we learned so far? We've learned about the creation, the sin, the fall, the man got wicked. God started over with the flood and Noah and his, and the sinners were on the boat even. So it's still a problem as it is today, because that sin gene after the fall was in Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and their wives too. But chapter 11 through chapter 50, the last chapter of Genesis, guess what we're going to be doing? The whole rest of it is going to be about Abraham and his son Isaac and his son Jacob and the patriarchs, and it's going to lead us all the way down. We're going to follow the descendants of Abraham, which, you know, from the New Testament, that eventually Jesus is one of the descendants of Father Abraham. Let's touch on 10. It just says, now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we'll drop down to 21 now through the genealogies, and it says, unto Shem. And the rest of that chapter is about the line of Shem and where they settled. We'll touch base right there on chapter 10, verse 25. This is, people have written books about it. It says the name of one of his descendants was a fellow by the name of Peleg, P-E-L-E-G. And it says, for in his days the earth was divided. And there's a lot of theories about what that means, but really I think what it means, it's just about, you're going to find out the next chapter is what that's about. Because in his days is when they tried to build the Tower of Babel, and the earth got divided in language and everything, and they began to settle everywhere all over the land. Chapter 10 saying about they're settling all over the land, but it's because of Babel. They were all still together until Babel, and then the Lord confused their languages, and then they began to settle all the different nations over the world. 31 of chapter 10, these are the sons of Shem, after their families, after their languages, in their lands, after their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, after their generations, in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. Brings us to chapter 11 now. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. Everybody on the planet had spoke the same language at that time. Now what's going to happen at Babel, the different languages is going to be sent to them as a judgment from God to cause them to divide. But I always like to look all the way to Acts in the New Testament, and you see Pentecost. And what happened in Pentecost? Everybody was there from, it mentions like 13 or 14 different nations had come to Jerusalem for Pentecost, the celebration. And the disciples went out in the streets after the resurrection and began to preach the good news. And everybody heard it in their own language, even though those disciples were all preaching all probably in Aramaic. But everybody heard it in their own language. It was like a reversal of the Tower of Babel when everybody began to babble and speak different languages. It's almost to say, God's way of saying, the gospel is the cure for the divisions. And that's still true, ain't it? The gospel's for all people of all nations and all different languages that they're speaking. Right here after the election, I can say the gospel's the cure for the divisions in our country too, because you know what? The gospel's for Republicans, the gospel's for Democrats. I saw a church sign up near home here recently. It said, I liked it, it said, the elephant or the donkey. And then it said, the answer is in the lamb. I like that. So the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. So now we've got brick and mortar buildings going to be made here. And they said, go to, let us build a city and a tower. And the Tower of Babel, we believe, was it's called a ziggurat. They've excavated lots of them over in that area. It's kind of like a type of pyramid, but not exactly a pyramid from back in those days. And the area where Babel was supposed to be between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, which I remember from early years of grade school. They taught us that the cradle of civilization was Mesopotamia, which was the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. Well, that agrees with the Bible, I think. After the flood, that's where the early civilization was, but then it spread all over the world. So they're building a brick and mortar tower here, a ziggurat. And they said, let's build a tower whose top may reach to heaven, and let us make a name. Now, we can get into the whole thing again. I said it's just like Adam and Eve. After they sinned, they thought they could do something to make themselves right with God. Here you can kind of preach a sermon that these folks thought they could build a tower to heaven. By their own works, they could attain heaven. And we know it's not possible, is it? In any shape, form, or fashion of that sentence. You can't get to heaven by your own works. It's by grace through faith. Let us make us a name, lest we be scattered upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people's one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them. That's the human condition. You know, we have trouble with our restraint, don't we? Now, nothing will be restrained from them which they've imagined to do. Go to, this is the Lord speaking now, said, let us go down. There's the triune God again, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Let us go down and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the earth, and they left off to build the city. Project's over with. Therefore is the name of it called Babel. That's why it's called the Tower of Babel. Everybody began to babble to one another. They didn't speak the same language anymore. Because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. Read just the first verse, part of 10 here. New story. That's Tower of Babel story. They all got scattered. Now we get back to these are the generations of Shem. And we're going to follow Shem's descendants all through the Bible now. So we'll drop on down to 27 as we go through that. Everybody begat somebody, right? We'll get down to the important ones that we know here in the rest of the book. Verse 27. Now these are the generations of Terah, and Terah begat Abram. We know him as Abraham because God changes his name from Abram to Abraham later in the book. So Terah, he begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran, 3 brothers, and Haran begat Lot. We're going to run into him on over in the book, Abraham and his nephew Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. That's where Abraham, we're going to find him and Sarah living at, right? And Abraham and Nahor, they took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, whom we know as Sarah because God changes her name later here too. And the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, and the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai, or Sarah, she was barren, and she had no child. That's important to remember as we go over through the waiting on that promised child as they get into their old age. And Terah took Abram his son and Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son, Sarah, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. That's kind of a foreshadowing of what we're going to start reading about in the next chapters. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years. By the way, you think, well, that's an old man. But remember, before the flood, they were living to be 900-something years. When the flood happened, the age started going down with each generation until it's down, well, about where it's at now. In Moses' day, he wrote, we spend our years as a tale that is told, but they're soon cut off and we fly away. And he said, if a man's days are 70, that's about average today, ain't it, 70? But he said, but if by reason of strength he lived to be 120, or 80, no, he said 80. Moses was 120 when he wrote that. So, you know, he said, but then it's full of trouble, you know, so when you get up about 80, it gets rough. But the genealogy, something happened in the flood. Remember, it dropped. Even though old Moses, he still lived to be 120, but most people were starting to live about to the age we are in just a few chapters past the flood. All right, we'll pick up there again next week. That's sort of an introduction to what's going to start happening with Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Jacob. We're going to spend chapters and chapters on them. See you next week.